Everybody, welcome back to the Swarm.
Hey guys, welcome to the Swarm and welcome to my den.
We are in James's living room.
I think we're officially a mobile podcast at this point. I don't think we've recorded in our studio in a hot minute.
We haven't. The guys at Cicada were still working diligently here now at 7:15, and at that point, we're like, we probably should just leave here and go to our house.
And here we are, 1850s original New Orleans shotgun home, located in Central City.
James has a pretty awesome setup. He's got a double with a carriage house in the back.
The double is currently occupied, but the carriage house is also occupied, but by cats. It's
7 of them.
It's a little dilapidated, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we will.
We need to find some good architects in the city. I don't know any, but I'm sure we'll find some.
All right, so we want to give a quick shout to Rivergate, our last episode. If you do not listen to it, it's an exciting episode. I feel like we always say that, but they are.
Yeah, well, and a shout out to the Preservation Resource Center for putting it on.
And the Louisiana New Orleans Foundation for Architecture.
Yes. It was really cool. A lot of people showed up, people putting on the VR goggles and using their phones to get the 3D models, and they also played with our 3D print.
Yes.
Which I felt like was a really cool contribution to. They got to see the Rivergate printed in its full scale. I mean, in its scaledness.
Surprisingly, in my opinion, came out better than I expected.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks, James.
You're welcome.
We have been getting a lot of good feedback. A lot of people have been asking, how can I now experience it now that the event is over? And the PRC, the Preservation Resource Center, will be releasing the QR codes as well as the links here soon.
So if you didn't go to the event, you can actually walk through the 3D model on your phone or your computer, right?
Yep, that's
cool.
Right. Today's guest,
Mike
James.
Bucher.
Mike is a great case study, in my opinion, from a developer standpoint, because he has come from a larger outfit in Sterling Properties, and now he's working in a smaller outfit with urban properties.
Kind of what we did. We went from, working for bigger firms, and now we kind of start our own business. And Mike gives a really good, human perspective on development, because every time you say a developer's development, it's like this weird, ambiguous, what is this person coming in and doing? It kind of has some people think ton of money, and other people think they're bad people. Or
when we mean some people, we mean James, actually. He thinks...
I guess that was me.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
your perception.
Yeah, well, everyone has a different perception, but it's developer. They can be perceived as the bad guy in a movie or something.
Yeah, no, I think you completely nail that on the head. You always hear developer. I feel like it's very seldomly that they're shined in good light. It's usually oh my gosh, they're gentrifying our area. I think we do get a kind of a good glimpse into how you can become a developer, how he got to be a developer, and then what it means for him to really help neighborhoods. He's genuinely concerned about where he lives and the people around him. So
Mike was a great guest. He's a very smart guy. And following this episode, our next episode, we will have Aaron Fruman from Uncommon Construction, who was also a great guest. He runs a nonprofit organization centered around building homes with high school students. Well, hope you guys enjoy this episode.
Enjoy.
And we love y'all.
Here's Mike.
Hi, everyone. I'm James.
And I am Seamus. And you are listening to
The Swarm,
a podcast about architecture and design.
We're two architects at the firm Cicada here in New Orleans.
The Swarm is an outlet that brings the world of architecture to the people.
Our goal is to educate our listeners about design and construction by interviewing locals who are making an impact on their community.
So, Mike, tell us, where are you from? Are you from here?
I'm not from here. I actually grew up, spent most of my childhood in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
When I was in high school, my parents moved to Connecticut, so I went to high school there, and then I left the house. My parents said when we were 18 we had to leave, and so I took it seriously, and I went to college at Villanova University, and then I moved to Northern Virginia and built houses in Northern Virginia for...
So, Mike, I mean, this sounds kind of military. Was that a military family growing up? Or
my dad was in the military,
okay,
and then he got into a sales career. So,
okay,
we were kind of used to moving around. Actually, there was a couple other pit stops in there that I just sort of glossed over. So, yeah, we had a military background, but also, in a sales career, you generally do a lot of moving around. My dad was in medical sales.
Gotcha.
So, when you say built houses, were you building houses or
building houses. I was a superintendent, essentially, like
Oh,
project
what?
manager. So there was some guy grabbed me at a career fair and said, would you be interested in learning more about building houses? And it sounded like a fascinating thing to me because growing up, I was kind of always into building. I had always volunteered with Habitat for Humanity and other organizations like that. I took a lot of architecture classes throughout high school because they were offered. So it just kind of like was a fit. It was a cool first job.
Well, that kind of goes into my next question. How did you know you wanted to get into development? And I'm guessing that from doing this house building, maybe that started a light bulb went off for you, or how did that?
Yeah, I mean, it just started to get boring after,
Really?
just the type of home building that I was doing was very much a production style home building. If you can think of like, it doesn't, you don't see it as much in Southeast Louisiana, but, if you could think about like major cities in the Northeast or in the Southwest or California where you have these like tract home developments of like 300 homes in a subdivision and everything kind of looks the same.
Totally understand. Totally hate that. There's
Yeah.
nothing worse than when you have this beautiful land, with all of these trees, a bunch of single family homes come in and they wipe out all the trees and then they don't plant anything back, and it's literally the same exact house over and over and over, no trees.
Yeah, it's like the same landscaping
Right.
package with like the little tree that inevitably nobody actually takes the stakes off of, and it like chokes the tree to death after the first like 3 years. Anyway, so I did that in Northern Virginia for 7 years, but it reminded me of a story looking at this beautiful cicada light fixture on your wall. I know that you viewers at home can't see this, but you should stop by. But anyway,
we have a backlit glowing bug on the wall, so you can just peep into our window and take a gander.
one of my first years in Northern Virginia was the year the cicadas came out. Like it's like every 17 years or something.
It's
like
something
that.
crazy like that.
And if you've never experienced this, like this should be on your bucket list to go travel to a place where the cicadas are coming out, because it's crazy. I mean, it's like warfare. Like you drive down the street and you're just like mowing down cicadas.
Oh my
They're
God.
everywhere. It's hard to see.
So they make like an incessant sound. I mean, is it just like
And they're
overbearing?
big.
Is it overbearing
It's
when you're?
like just
they're like
surreal.
meaty-
You're
they're
like
meaty
in some
bugs.
kind of like Stephen King movie where like these things just like rule the world for like 2 weeks and then they're gone. It's just like, how do they? I don't really understand the life cycle or how it really works from like a biological standpoint. But it was like a pretty cool thing to experience. And so like, but you're like finding these things everywhere for like months, like in your sock drawer, like under the
yes.
couch.
It's like
right?
termite season here. They're just
Oh, that is
everywhere.
like termite season, except it's better.
Except better. And
Yeah.
so we had this friend who was in dental school, and he found one in our fireplace in like this apartment we lived in Arlington, Virginia. And like 2 weeks later, he mailed it back to us in cast in a dental mold.
Yes.
And I can't find it. It's somewhere in I've had it for years. We're talking like 15 years ago. So, I mean, I guess the cicadas are probably about to come out again within the next couple of years. But I had this thing for years, and I wanted to give it to you. I looked.
Oh, that would have been an awesome gift.
But
Mike.
I will find it, and
We
when
can
I do,
we can 3D print it then.
We can 3D print it, but that's not the same. All right, Mike. So back to development. So you're doing the you're doing the home thing, and you're getting bored of it. And then what happens then?
Oh, so the market crashed. So most, it's a time where you think about like, well, what are the next steps for me? And really, I had been thinking about getting into commercial real estate. I wasn't sure what the right way to do it is. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think now in retrospect, there's no right way to do it. My way ended up being as good as any, but I went back to business school and I got an MBA. And I don't necessarily know that I really had to do that. I think, tangentially it opened up some doors to me that probably could have been opened up a number of different ways,
Right.
but it just happened to be through some networking through school that I ultimately landed my first job with a real estate developer, actually a REIT called Federal Realty based in the DC area, but I was I took that job in Boston and worked on a project, my first big project in Boston,
Awesome.
right outside of Boston, Somerville, Massachusetts.
How did you get from Boston to New Orleans? Because I feel like that's a pretty big step.
Yeah, so I mean, as you probably would have guessed, my wife is from New Orleans, and so at some point it wasn't a matter of if, it was just a matter of when.
He's he's here now,
and
baby.
So, we made the decision to move down here before our first child was born, about almost 4 years ago now.
Okay, great.
And so, for the personal and and even from professional reasons, especially for my wife, it made a lot of sense at the timing of it. I was a little it was hard for me to leave the project I was working on in Boston at the time. It was a really great high profile project that and I enjoyed the team I was working on, but at any rate, I knew what I was getting into when I got married to a New Orleanian.
Nice.
So I know what a developer is, but I think the 18-year-old James had a very different idea of what a developer was. You say developer, or other people, you hear the term, and the first thing I thought was like, oh, hotshot person who has money, they can do what they want, they can invest into buildings or an idea or a company. But then, like, you go through school and like you learn all this history and whatnot, and it's like, oh, is the developer a bad guy? Like, he comes into this neighborhood and he
ruining
changes
everything.
things, and so like the idea of a developer is probably different for everyone. How did you see a developer before you got into the industry, and can you explain what you do now as a developer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because coming from my angle where I was. I went to the University of Virginia for grad school. I was networking with a lot of people who worked for large development companies, working on large mixed-use, very complicated projects in D.C. and Boston and New York. And a developer for me was somebody who was like redefining like what the skyline looked like, right? It was just like there was no middle ground. It was just like this, I'm doing something transformative,
Right?
And so
glamorous. It's a glamour deal.
It was a glamour thing, right? I mean, there was no other facet of the real estate industry that was as glamorous or sexy as building a 20-story apartment building or big retail. Center and right outside of Boston, and so that was for me, that was kind of what drove me to that, just because I wanted to be the person who was working on the things that people were writing about and that people were talking about. I didn't really kind of understand the steps that it took for the people who were really the ideas behind those projects, who were executing, who brought them to the point where they were teed up so that somebody like me could work on them.
Mike, same parallel to architecture. You're in school and it's like, holy moly, I want to do skyscrapers. And that's all you're thinking about is these skyscrapers, Zaha Hadid's, Gary's of the world. And no one's thinking in the back of their heads that they're going to be designing potentially bathrooms. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, just components of them, right? I mean, whatever that is.
Which is where people spend most of their time, by the way, is in the bathroom.
There's nothing wrong with that, James.
At Cicada, we make fantastic bathrooms.
Thanks, James.
Come on down.
We're going to go ahead and just delete that.
The first time.
There's there's so many levels in between that, right? And I mean, even we're moving to New Orleans has kind of opened my eyes even more so to just kind of, I use Domain as an example, but there are a lot of folks who you've never heard of doing really cool things around this city on a scale which is attainable for just about anybody. You have to have a little bit of creativity, a little bit of money. You've got to have a lot of, motivation and, stick-to-itiveness in terms of being able to see something through. There's no tried and true path. Nothing's guaranteed to be a financial success, but there's a lot of different ways to do it.
So can you put what a developer is in a box? Can you explain in a statement like what does that mean to people who don't know what that is?
Ultimately, I think real estate development is taking something to its highest and best use, right? I mean, that's probably the best way to just put it in a box. Whether it's a warehouse in Elmwood, whether it's an office building on Poydras Street, whether it's street retail on Magazine, it's taking something and transforming it to its highest and best use. It could be anything. It just depends upon the market. It depends upon the demographics of the people who live there. But ultimately, I think what a developer does is, they maximize what a property can be, in a given market. And so that's what it's about. It doesn't have to be, it can be a house. It can be a duplex, right? It can be a 4-unit apartment building. It can be a 35-story, office building. There's a lot of different ways that can take shape.
And And clients come to you looking to maximize these opportunities, or are you out there looking to maximize your own opportunities?
Both. So, I mean, in my role at Urban Properties, we do both. We are out there looking for those opportunities where we see something that could be much better. We also do third-party work and consult with other organizations, corporations, individuals who don't have that development or real estate acumen, who are looking for somebody to help them take their property to the next level. So I would say it's probably about half and half for us right now.
Mike, you came from a larger firm with Sterling Properties prior to coming to Urban Properties. How do those compare to one another, going from a large-scale Sterling to an Urban Properties? And I guess what are the major differences for you kind of scaling down?
I'm in an entrepreneur role right now at Urban, where I'm out there looking for opportunities every day. I think at a company like Sterling and like Federal Realty before that, up in Boston, established firms where, things were assigned to me. Here's what we're working on. Here's what we need you to do, right? This is a pre-existing relationship, and we want you to, take this, project and work on it. And I had that skill set. I wasn't really the person. I think what was missing in my career up until now was I wasn't the person who was actually coming up with the ideas. I was the person who was there to help execute, and I was a good executor. I still consider myself to be a pretty good executor, but I was not the greatest originator, or I wasn't the creative guy. And at Urban, I'm forced more into that role to think about things differently, to scale down my expectations about what really, at the end of the day, is a project that I want to work on. It doesn't have to be on the front page of the real estate section of NOLA.com to be a worthwhile opportunity to work on. Urban Properties our goal is really to stay centered on, urban infill, mostly in New Orleans, small mixed use projects. But it's not the reality that there's going to be opportunities like that every day. And so we've expanded our geography and have really, we're working on projects actually really from New Orleans out to Biloxi right now. But if we had our preferences, we'd really be focused on the urban core in New Orleans.
So is there any projects that you can specifically talk about that are happening in New Orleans or in the Gulf Coast region?
Yeah, absolutely. So, New Orleans proper, we have two projects underway right now. One of them is on the Lafitte Greenway, which is an area that I think we at Urban, as well as many others in the city, find to be a fascinating, development opportunity.
Yes, Seamus and I have biked it with Matt, actually.
We have biked
It's a good route.
Yeah, it's a good ride, and there's, I think there's more and more opportunity presenting itself along the Greenway. It's sort of, it's really been a grassroots, revitalization effort over the last 10 years, and, continues to really be that way, although there's new comprehensive zoning regulations in place really to kind of control what happens there, I think, for the better. But in general, that's an area we like. We've got a property there right now that we have leased in part to Social Bicycles, the blue bikes around town.
Nice.
Love blue bikes. I use them all the time.
New Orleans just recently got a bike sharing system. We're always, I feel like, very late to the game in general, but we finally got the blue bikes bike sharing system here in town. It's all over Lafitte Greenway. It's all over really everywhere now in the city.
There's a few by my house, and it's more convenient than bringing my own bike to places because I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's fantastic just because...
It's fantastic.
I said it again. It's... we also, here in New Orleans, there's a lot of bike lanes, which for like maybe a big urban city, that's more common, but for a smaller city like New Orleans, it's not very common. So we're actually on the forefront of making this kind of a bike-friendly city.
Yeah, I think, and that's totally why, the bike sharing system took so long, is because we didn't really have many roads, A, that were drivable by car, and B, actually had a bike lane. So I think we're finally getting there. But
I'm still... staying in a very close radius to my house on a bike.
Happy ending.
At any rate, so their Social Bicycles is the company behind that, and their local HQ is in one of Urban's properties on the Lafitte Greenway. And so, that's what we strive for, is kind of doing something different, bringing new, new uses, whether it's retail and Social Bicycles, whether I think it's like a quasi, almost entertainment use, but, to the city. And so, there are other components of that property as well, one of which is a development which is in the works and unfortunately can't be discussed at this time, but is something that we look forward to some announcements on because that's it's really a true development project on the Greenway that we're excited about.
Is there a project that you've been assigned to that's been unexpected and interesting that you'd like to disclose?
I don't know if you're leading me.
We are
or not. I'm building a trampoline park right now. So, which obviously you guys know, in Slidell, actually of all places. Nice. And so so that is one that kind of fell into my lap.
Well, I think this is a great story because, and I was leading you. I take the blame there, but it's a great story because suburban life. We keep talking about the city, but where suburban life is going, and so you have these big box stores, and you can elaborate on this a little bit more. But big box stores are going out of business, and there's these shells, and what do you do with it? You know, so and you guys are. I mean, I think it's great.
Absolutely. I mean, this will be a real estate problem. Development, it just is only part of that equation for years and years to come. I mean, big boxes in terms of, some of these, the names, the Toys R Us's, the Sears of the world. You're constantly reading about store closures and how do you repurpose this space, and that is a real estate development problem to some degree. And so in some cases. In some very specific cases, because the requirements for repurposing these buildings to trampoline parks are very specific in terms of ceiling heights and the size, parking requirements, et cetera. But this building, which was a former Best Buy building in Slidell, actually coincidentally, that Best Buy had vacated to go into a Sterling Properties development at Fremont Town Center a few years ago and sat empty for a few years and was identified by Altitude Trampoline Park as a great market for a trampoline park. And so, they brought me in really as the sort of the real estate development expert to really take this project kind of full circle from an empty run down, shut down Best Buy to, a vibrant, kid-centric trampoline park, which will open in September.
Well, it's a very unique program for a building, and it's also interesting to see how the lives of these spaces that are typically designed specifically for one thing, like cheap, fast construction that has a very minimal amount of columns, high ceiling space, and then the original tenant moves out, and now it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge amount of space, right? I mean, it's a 30,000 square foot building, and so one of the things that that I find very interesting about this is just that it's a $2 million job. So I mean, in the scheme of things, it's not a big project, but I mean, that capital has to come from somewhere. There's only so many types of uses that can backfill that type of space. These are generally not national companies. These are generally local people. So that's where we're filling a niche with a local group who's decided to invest in something. They've got the capital. They don't have the expertise. Our backgrounds at Urban are all pretty much in retail, and if you're in the retail business, you understand that as the future of online, retail evolves, the future is really going to be in experience-driven, retail properties where you can be entertained, where you can eat a great, kind of chef-driven meal, whatever that is. But the run-of-the-mill shopping centers are, they're dying.
Is there any other weird, quirky, similar to the trampoline story that you could elaborate on?
That's a great question. So similar to the trampoline thing is definitely going to be one of the more unique things I've ever worked on. But I worked on a project in outside of Boston, bringing Legoland Discovery Center to Boston. Cool. 35,000 square foot, essentially Lego Wonderland.
That's crazy.
An indoor amusement park, essentially all designed around Legos. Wow. And so that was another kid-focused entertainment venue that actually of a similar size, although that was ground up construction, was part of a bigger. Retail entertainment building complex that we were doing outside of Boston. So that was neat too. I mean, they had like a contest to hire the master Lego builder for this store, which was like a national contest of like people who just were like amateur Lego enthusiasts, and the one who won got to be the
designer?
the Lego, like the master Lego builder for that store. Like that
the
was his
architect
job.
dream.
That
right
is
there.
the
The
dream.
architect dream. They had full scale replicas of Fenway Park
Oh,
and
wow.
the Prudential Tower and Faneuil Hall,
Plaza
and everything you can think
Tower
about. Plaza Tower. That would be Lego. The Legoland Discovery Center would be awesome in New Orleans. I think it would do really, really well for people who are looking for things to do with their families down here. If we could find
Mike-
they're expensive deals.
Mike,
but
cue it up. Find the next big box store going out of town. Let's Lego center that
let's
thing up.
Lego it
You're
up.
the perfect person. For
In
this.
reality, it needs to be like as close to the French Quarter as possible.
That is true.
So maybe that's a future use of a couple floors of Plaza Tower.
I'm in.
Yeah, so Mike walks in and we have a 3D print of Plaza Tower on the table, and he points at it and he's like, "Hey, did you know an interesting fact about this is that there used to be residential apartments inside, and there's a pool right here." And we were like, "No,
What?
we didn't know that.
Yeah,
This
that's
building
wild.
has like a life of its own." And obviously, from our previous episode, it's definitely taken on like a cult of its own.
The 3D model needs to be updated for the pool.
It does need to be.
Pretty rusty.
Mike's beating us up over here over our 3D print. If you had an unlimited budget tomorrow and can build anything right now in the city of New Orleans, what would that be?
Wow, an unlimited budget.
Unlimited
and could
budget.
build anything. Does it need to make money?
Man, I didn't
let's do
specify
both.
that.
Let's do both.
We didn't talk about the other aspect of real estate development is you need to make money doing it. Otherwise, you're not going to be a real estate developer
Let's-
for very long.
Let's pretend that no, it doesn't have
It
to make
doesn't
money.
have
What
to
would
make
you
money.
want to see in the city?
Wow. I mean, if I were that's interesting. I would like to see if I had an unlimited budget.
Unlimited budget.
I would like to see the interstate underground.
Oh.
Bold move.
I didn't see that coming at all. It doesn't
So-
make money. It could make money.
You know where my mind went just now? I was thinking indoor skydiving, but not like the fan, like literally build a tower like 1,400 feet tall.
So,
Anyway,
so the interstate, I mean, a great example for this, and I'm kind of cheating a little bit just because I lived in the city, is the Big Dig in Boston, where they put a section of I-93 underground. And really, what that did is when the highway, when the U.S. interstate system was built back in mid-century, it really isolated a lot of neighborhoods, especially with elevated interstates. It certainly did that in New Orleans. It did that in Boston.
Treme is a great example.
The Treme is a great example. That whole Claiborne corridor, North Claiborne corridor. Well, in Boston, same unintended consequence. It was about a 30 or 40-year project in the making by the time that stretch of the interstate was completely underground. But it's transformed the city. It's essentially taken two areas of which were separate and distinct and really opened up, so many real estate development opportunities. But, putting an interstate under the ground is real estate development just as much as, building a building.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, I think really I don't understand totally what the geotechnical...
Oh my goodness! I was going to say. I mean,
That's
unfortunately,
what that
Mike,
would
we're
be.
no longer in Boston, and we are,
be-
underwater.
Well, so
right
is
now.
Boston.
It'd be
Don't
like
forget,
building a
so is
tunnel.
Boston.
That is true.
Right?
Okay.
Right on the harbor, and technically is all,
So they just insulated themselves as far as the water table out there. I mean, they were just able to insulate themselves from.
Yeah, they went underground. I mean, it's a
That's
tunnel.
true. That's true.
So I mean, I don't how that was designed and
Crazy
engineered.
engineering
I mean, but it's really it shouldn't be that much different.
I think we need
I
to
would
step it
guess.
up.
Well, this is a good design subject because the elevated interstate kind of doesn't work here because of the massive size of the columns and the height that they chose to elevate it. So if we could have at the time made thinner columns and gone much higher and maybe painted the underside of the interstate, it would have allowed enough light to go under where you could plant trees, right? And it's actually a constraint of the structural design and the design choice and obviously the money that it took to build it. So that's just a good example of how something was designed a specific way and it immediately just like knife cut an entire neighborhood and made like a desolate area.
Absolutely. I mean, and if you want a perfect example of that, even in a modern day sense, I mean, look at the University Medical Center and its connectivity to the rest of the downtown. I mean, there is none. People don't want to walk back and forth underneath the interstate. It's very difficult to make that transition.
That's a great point. Yeah. Is there any project that you've done while at Urban Properties that you feel proud of right now that's going on in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, I think I'll give some more credit to the other guys at Urban than myself on this one in particular. But you know, one of the projects that is very under the radar. You know, most people probably aren't even going to see it or notice it, but is in Treme, which is the renovation of a historic building that used to be a deli, actually, kind of more of like a corner grocery store deli, into retail and mixed use with a couple of apartments, a couple condominiums. It's really kind of transforming a corner at Ursuline and North Dorgenois, and is just a very cool example of small scale real estate development in the city, the type of thing that's accessible to anybody who's interested in getting into that business. And so it's probably 2-3 months away from completion, and it's just going to be a very cool project in the urban portfolio.
That's great. It's one of those things, again, it's not a skyscraper that we kind of always dream about, but it is something more tangible that does affect our daily lives and betters our daily lives. If you could give a piece of advice for your younger self to where you are now, what would that be?
That's a great question. Wow, a piece of advice to my younger self.
You're in college. You don't know what the heck you're doing. You think you want to be an architect.
Yeah, I think my wife tells me this all the time, and I think that the key takeaway is mindfulness, is living in the present, is understanding that life is short, and don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that I'm getting better at that. I think especially in the real estate development world, people can take it very personally when you're trying to come into their neighborhood and change something, right? And it's always good to understand that there's a compromise, that there's somebody who's lived there all their life and has a perspective that's different from yours. Just because you think you've got the best idea doesn't mean everybody else does. And so I think that it's easy to get frustrated and turned away by whether it's a city council, whether it's a neighborhood a neighborhood association, whatever it is. And so for me, I mean, the piece of advice that I would give myself is really don't take yourself too seriously. Understand other people's perspectives. I think that that's really a linchpin of being a successful real estate developer.